Hello, Brett Etheridge here, founder of Dominate Test Prep, and welcome to part 2 of our Executive Assessment Mastery Series, a free 3-part video series where my goal is to demystify the executive assessment for you, but more than that, to equip you with very tangible content knowledge and strategies and tricks and test-taking techniques to equip you to get more right answers on test day. That's ultimately your goal, is to get a high EA score, and my goal is to help you do that starting in this video series. And in this video in particular, I'm going to actually share with you one of my absolute best strategies for the verbal section of the executive assessment. Now, this lesson will stand alone, but if you haven't already watched part 1, I highly encourage you to go back and do that. I shared 3 of the common mistakes students often make on the executive assessment and pointed you in the right direction, taught you what you should be doing or thinking instead. So definitely go back and watch that if you haven't already. I'll post the link directly in the show notes below. But we've received a lot of really positive feedback on that. Thank you for your emails and direct messages and YouTube comments. I wanted to share one of them with you quickly. This one comes from Anusha, who said, quote, "These non-standard strategies," referring to one of the strategies I taught in the last lesson, "are awesome!" Exclamation point. Can you make a similar video for verbal? Well, Anusha, you read my mind, because that is exactly what we're going to do, right? In the last video, it was a little bit math intensive, but the verbal section of the executive assessment is weighted equally with the quantitative section. It's just as important, and for some of you, it is going to be the more challenging section. And even if it's not, even if you're feeling good about it, I think you're really going to like what I teach you here, because I do think it will help you on some of the more difficult sentence correction questions. In fact, let's just take a quick step back before I share this technique with you, and let's situate ourselves in time and space, especially for those of you who are new to the executive assessment. As a reminder, the executive assessment verbal reasoning section consists of 3 major question types: sentence correction, which I've alluded to, a second question type called critical reasoning, and then reading comprehension, which you've probably done before on other standardized tests. You read passages and answer questions. What I want to do, though, is I want to focus in this video on sentence correction. And the reason for that is because in my experience, and I've been teaching for a long time, students are generally able to make the biggest and fastest gains on the sentence correction question type. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to work on sentence correction a little bit here, and I think this is going to be particularly helpful for those of you for whom English is not your first language, but even if you are a native English speaker, be careful. One of the common things I see, one of the mistakes I see a lot of students making on sentence correction questions is over-relying on your ear. And what I mean by that is going based on what sounds right instead of what is right. So in the world of sentence correction, you're reading a sentence, you're trying to decide if it's correct or if there's an error and you need to revise the sentence somehow. The correct answer has to be grammatically correct. And so often as native English speakers, we never actually were taught the English the traditional way, and we couldn't even tell you what the past perfect tense means, and things that maybe we would recognize look good or sound good, but I don't have the technical stuff to know, is this actually right? And yet that's your objective on the executive assessment, sentence correction question type. But I have a cool technique to help you with that, to at least put you in a position to have a chance to filter it through some of the common grammar rules that you absolutely must learn for the executive assessment, and we certainly teach in our course. But here I want to teach you what's called the bracketing technique. Now, why reinvent the wheel? I've already taught this technique with a really cool example in my course, so that's exactly what I'm going to do, is I'm going to share that lesson with you here, excerpted directly from our complete executive assessment prep course, literally a lesson from that course on the bracketing technique that I think you will find super helpful. So without further ado, I'll give you a little peek on the inside, but more importantly to share with you the bracketing technique to equip you for success on the executive assessment verbal section. Take a look. Now here's the premise, and here's why I teach it, and here's why it is helpful. Oftentimes in sentence correction questions, the original sentence, fairly simple and straightforward grammar errors are disguised, are camouflaged, are hidden, and sort of obscured by all of the extra wording going on in the sentence. It makes them difficult to spot, right? Take a look at this example. Question pops up on the screen. It's a long sentence. The degree of error in calculations done by ancient Mayan astronomers long before the invention of telescopes were, even by modern standards, incredibly small. Is there an error? Sounds good. I mean, when I read it, I didn't stumble over anything when I read it. Sounds pretty good. It's long, a little bit wordy, but I can understand what it's saying. Is there an error there? But there's a lot of distracting stuff in there, whether you realize it or not. And the antidote, or the way to kind of break through that, is with the bracketing technique. And here's kind of the mental picture, the visual picture of what I'm talking about. You saw this picture on the left before, right? Back here, you might not have realized, though, there were some words in there. They're deliberately hard to see. It's kind of like what happens on some of these long sentences, right? Grammar, oh, I can see it now, but now I can definitely see it, right? The bracketing technique is like taking the picture on the left and blurring out the background a little bit, taking away some of the noise, the stuff that makes it hard to see, and it makes grammar are fun jump out at us. And now we can see that that's wrong. Grammar are fun. No, grammar is fun. But how do we do that on a real sentence? How do we do it on that long convoluted sentence we just looked at? The bracketing technique is basically this idea of reading around potentially distracting phrases by enclosing them in brackets. And I say mentally because questions are on a computer screen. You're not going to be writing on the computer screen, but we want to essentially bracket out some of this distracting information. Well, what counts as distracting information? Two things. We want to bracket out prepositional phrases of, in, to, for, by, with, right? That introduces, by definition, modifying information. In clauses set off by commas, that information is parenthetical in nature, oftentimes modifying information that distracts us from the crux of the sentence itself, right? The pared down, more basic version of the sentence. And that's what we want to do. After we sort of read around the distracting phrases, we can write or rewrite the most basic version of the sentence without all the fluff, without all the stuff that's distracting us. We can write that down on our scratch paper and literally be able to more easily see, or at least test, whether or not there is an error. And there might not be. We'll talk about what happens in that case. But if there is an error, it's a little bit more obvious and easy to see once we've gotten rid of some of those distractors. Let's go back to our sample sentence. What are the prepositional phrases? Do we have any clauses set off by commas? Yeah, we see that preposition of. The degree, what kind of degree? The degree of error in calculations done by ancient Mayan astronomers. Like, that's all modifying information about the degree. So we see that preposition. We also see those two commas, right? This parenthetical information, this phrase set off by commas, even by modern standards. Okay, so what do? Let's kind of mentally block that stuff out, because that's non-essential information. It helps us understand something about what's going on, right? It's modifying information. Maybe it's going to be relevant. And by the way, it still may be part of the sentence where there are errors. But if we're trying to test certain things, in this case, subject-verb agreement, let's get rid of all that stuff. And notice if we mentally block out all of the red stuff, what are we left with? The degree were incredibly small. That's the sentence. That's the subject-verb object. All sentences have a subject-verb object, and then all this other stuff. But let's get rid of all of that other stuff. This is what we would write on our scratch paper, and now hopefully it's way more obvious that the verb is incorrect. We didn't see that in the original, because by the time we got to the verb were, it kind of sounded good in context. Right? The invention of telescopes were. Sounds good. And if the invention of telescopes had been the subject of the sentence, were would be correct. Calculations were. Yeah, that would be correct if calculations were the subject, but it's not. Astronomers were. Yeah, that would be correct if astronomers were the subject, but it's not. All of that stuff was inside the prepositional phrase, and the object of a preposition isn't the subject of the sentence. So by bracketing and all that out, we isolate the subject, the degree, singular, that needs the singular conjugation was, the degree was incredibly small. So that's it. Hopefully now you do have a big smile on your face. You understand why I enjoy teaching this technique so much. Just a couple of other thoughts for you. The first is, if you don't, what we did here was we got rid of all of the parenthetical stuff to be able to look at the core part of the sentence. The degree were incredibly small. What if it had said the degree was incredibly small? Now there wouldn't be a problem with that part of the sentence. We would then need to look inside the brackets for an error. That we would say, okay, maybe there's a problem with the modifier itself. Maybe there's something inside the brackets that is an error. Maybe there's an incorrect idiom inside the brackets. Like, we might have to look inside the brackets at some point, but we can start by bracketing that stuff out to isolate, in this case, subject-verb agreement. And in fact, what is the bracketing technique good for? You're not going to need the bracketing technique on every single sentence. So don't feel like you have to bracket it really depends on the sentence. It depends on how much of it's underlined. It has, sometimes it's very obvious what the grammar rule is that you're trying to test because only a few words are underlined. You probably don't need the bracketing technique for that. The bracketing technique tends to be beneficial on the longer sentences where big chunks of it are underlined and we just need to get some clarity on what's going on. And it is especially helpful for identifying, as you have seen on the screen. Big time helpful for subject-verb agreement, as in the example we just saw. But it can also be helpful for isolating the pronoun and what does the pronoun refer back to. More on that in the pronoun lesson, but that's important. And sometimes we can bracket out the stuff that's making it hard to figure that out. Idioms can sometimes be isolated with the bracketing technique. So there you go. What'd you think? Can you see how this will be so helpful for you to really zero in on the points of grammar that are being tested on a sentence? Absolutely, right? This is one of those tools in your tool belt. In the last video, we talked about having a proverbial tool belt, like an executive assessment tool belt, where you can pull out different tools for different question types. Well, here's a really cool tool now for your tool belt for the verbal section. And it's like the Swiss Army knife, right? There are so many different ways you can use this particular tool. So I'm confident that it will help you if you practice it and learn it, right? Just because you've seen me apply it to one sentence doesn't automatically mean you'll automatically be able to do it well yourself. That will require some practice. But I'm confident you'll pick it up quickly. And then, of course, even if you do apply it well and you have isolated the parts of the sentence you need to be looking at, do you know then all of the rules and all of the different categories? That would be the next step for you. Beyond the scope of this video, but of course we teach it all in our course. I call it the big 6 grammar categories, right? The points of English grammar that appear over and over and over again on the executive assessment. So if you're ready to take that next step, learn all of that as well as some other cool tips and strategies, head over to dominatetestprep.com/executive-assessment to learn more and register for our complete executive assessment prep course. But there is a little bit more I want to share with you, right? To this point now, I've dispelled some of the common mistakes that you may be making on the executive assessment. I've given you a really cool math strategy. Here I've equipped you with the bracketing technique, a really cool verbal strategy. But there is a little bit more that I want to share with you, and that is going to be the subject of part 3 of the Executive Assessment Mastery Series. I'm not going to spill all the beans, but I will tell you that we are going to start to touch on time management in the next video. That's a big part of doing well and something I know a lot of students struggle with, so definitely be on the lookout for that. If you haven't already clicked that subscribe button, do it now so you're alerted as soon as that next episode goes live. In the meantime, I'll let you head over to dominatetestprep.com to learn more about the executive assessment course. I'll let you get back to practicing this bracketing technique. And I would actually love to hear from you as a discussion question. What are you most looking forward to in business school, right? We're so focused on the executive assessment. I just want to get to know you better. Business school is fun. It can be fun. It's certainly going to stretch you and help you grow. What are you interested in? What are you most looking forward to? So post those comments and any other questions you may have in the comments area below. I look forward to engaging with you there. Of course, if you're unsure about anything that I actually taught in this particular lesson, I'm here to help. So post your questions below as well. And for now, I will sign off, but I will look forward to seeing you again in the third and final part of this Executive Assessment Mastery series. Take care, everyone.